Good afternoon. What's happening, everybody? Hey, so one place I don't have to worry about. Bass is too loud. Who plays bass? Hold your hand up if you play bass. All right. I just wanted to make sure. We got any drummers here? Who plays drums? All right. Hey, besides you, the drummers need to be here. All the bass players need to be at the drummer.
Yeah.
Okay, now, who of you bass players plays the piano? Who plays the piano just enough to know your chords? Okay. Y'all are messing up. I'm telling you. You don't, the piano is the workshop. Okay? Piano has what? Bass, it's got melody, it's got harmony, it's got rhythm, it's got all the elements of music. You don't gotta be Herbie Hancock. Okay? But you need to know the notes that are in E minor 11 with a flat 5. You need to know every note. You need to know what the bass can do. More important, what the bass should not be doing, right? You need to know it, okay? Just get yourself a chord book, or just download a chord book now. Just sit at the piano and just go boom, figure out the notes are, and figure out the possibilities on the bass. Play E minor 7 with a flat 5. Flat 5. Bossa Nova 1. Now if you go this, you do this. Piano player is going to slap you in the back of your neck. Because it has a flat 5, right? So you can't play one regular 5. Here you go. Now, I can't tell you how many professional bass players do that. And the piano player just goes. You need to know your harmony, and that's just not for bass players. Saxophone players, you see John Coltrane, he'd hit the chord, hold the sustain pedal, and then run all his scales against the chord to make sure he knew. Piano is where you have all your elements. I write music for movies. I don't write music movies on the bass, okay? I write on the piano. Now, a couple of songs you can write on the bass. You know which songs, like the song we just started out with, you know that came from the bass, because it's all bass-centered. But all the melodic stuff, you're doing all the R&B, the piano really helps you, you know? So I would advise everybody, don't mess around, man. Especially young bass players, you know. I'm telling you, I know a lot of professionals who could use some piano lessons, you know. You don't have to know how to solo or nothing like that, just know how the chords are constructed. How many bass players have recorded? Hold your hand up if you've done recording sessions. Okay, so when you're recording and you're listening back, right? You're listening, like back in the control room, you're listening to see how y'all sounded. How many of y'all are going, oh man, I messed that up. Oh, I played something good. Oh, that's nice. That I broke that one off. Yeah. And how many of y'all listening to what the singers sing? Oh, wait a minute now. All the bass players are trying to, and not just bass players, all the musicians, young musicians, musicians who are just starting. They're just trying to play something that satisfies themselves, right? You know, either their fingers or their musical knowledge. They want to play something on a recording. But all the incredible musicians I know that I've worked with, they go back in the control room and they listen. And they'll say to the singer, oh man, that's nice the way you're saying that. Right? Oh man, we need more energy in that chorus, right? That last chorus, we need to help you out. Right? They're musicians and they're listening to the music and they're using whatever instrument is in their hands to make the music sound better. Now sometimes you got to play some bad stuff to make the music. Sometimes the music needs some killer bass. Sometimes it don't, right? So how many young musicians, bass players, man, I don't know why you don't go off on them Luther Vandross records, man. I don't know why you didn't just dude, Luther would have came out from behind the mic. But he didn't have to, because that wasn't even a consideration for me. You know what I mean? My thing was like, quarter notes. And I took that stuff as seriously as when I was playing with Miles. I was like, what? And I'd be sitting there, keep playing. I would be playing, and the drummer was Yogi Horton, and I'm watching Yogi's foot like this. And every drummer plays that different. Some guys go, ba boom, right? Bass drum, the first one's really out in front of the second one. Ba boom, right? Other drummers like boom, 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 right? And you gotta learn it, because the drummers ain't changing, they never change. My job. music sound right. Right now, if we're on a fusion date and it's about other considerations, make sure you got the tools to do what you need to do. But don't come on somebody's record day trying to impose your stuff on their record. And it's not just recording dates. I'll just say recording because the microscope is really intense on the recording. But even live gigs, y'all know who I'm talking about. You know if I'm talking about you. You come on the gig, oh man, I gotta play behind this singer, man. I'm gonna throw this little Jaco Pastorius lick I learned. And the singer's like, what's going on back there? Hey, you know Jaco got fired from a few gigs too. Now, if you're an artist, you've got a sound in your head, it's different, and you really feel strong about it. You'll do like Jaco did. You'll get fired from a few gigs. Realize maybe that's not the right situation for me. And you spend your time finding a situation that is right for you, and you'll do that. Most of us ain't gonna get that opportunity, okay? 99%. How many bass player stars do you know, right? Most of us have to figure out how to make music sound good. And most of y'all, when y'all hear a bass player who plays on every record that you've ever heard, y'all can't figure out why he gets all the work. You're like, why does he get all the work? He's not doing that, man. He's making that music sound good. He's dropping that downbeat right where it is. He never plays a fill and misses the downbeat. All y'all bass players who play the fill and miss the downbeat, that's like the cardinal sin. You were more interested in the fancy stuff and miss your responsibility. Right? You can't do that, man. Now, I'm gonna qualify all this by saying this is only my opinion. Okay? Right? A lot of people talk like it's facts. Okay, this is just my opinion from being around and experiencing stuff. But man, it makes me mad in the audience. I want to throw something at them. Oh man, I missed the downbeat. Oh man, I'm gonna jump up on stage. So this was my life. I came up. First it was Jamerson, right? I was listening to. I didn't know it was Jamerson because they didn't put the names of the musicians on the back of the albums, but it turned out it was Jamerson. I thought on the Jackson 5, I thought it was Jermaine Jackson, 14 years old, killing it. I want to be him. Not only is he playing all the bad Motown bass lines, he's dancing, singing. Whenever Michael needed to take a break, Jermaine stepped in there, right? Ooh, just one more chance. He'll shoot out. Turned out it was James Jamerson. Okay, then Larry Graham. Right? And if you were young and you heard that sound and you had never heard a bass player play like that, I thought it was two guitar players. When I heard I thought it was a guitar player going, I thought the bass just did this. And then Graham had this other And then after Graham, I heard Stanley Clarke, right? And he was like, he was playing a guitar. That was my man Stanley, and then I heard Jaco, right? And he was on some other stuff, and I got really into Jaco Pastorius to the point where I played fretless bass almost exclusively for like 2 years. And I was really into it because he was coming from a completely different place, and musically, when I first heard Jaco, I didn't get it. I didn't even like it because I was used to really bright, you know, aggressive sounds like Graham and Stanley Clarke, and his thing was all like, sounded muffled, you know? I was like, what is that, man? Doesn't he have a treble knob on his bass? But started taking, you know, learning about jazz, right? And we learned in high school in our jazz band, we learned Donna Lee. I said, that's that crazy song that Jaco started his album with. And I heard the chord changes for Donna Lee.
Right.
And then I played the bass line that I just learned in high school, along with Jocko's record. I went. You know Don Lee? 2, 3, and. And then everybody started trying to play bebop solos on the bass, and they all got fired from their R&B gigs. So you got to go. Okay, so that was Stanley, Jocko, and then after and okay, who else am I talking about? I'm talking about Paul Jackson from the Crusade, from the Herbie Hancock.
Paul Jackson.
I'm talking about Popswell from the Crusaders, right? These are guys who were holding it down, and people weren't paying as much attention to it because that was their job, holding it down, right? So Wilton Felder played bass, but he didn't play bass on the records that I heard, which was Those Southern Nights, and Boom Doom Doom Doom. That ain't the sound rate, that's not the sound. Feeling, but those were the bass players that were under the current, just doing work, right, for me. And then, who knows Omar Hakim? Omar Hakim's a drummer, and we grew up together. We were in high school together, and he was like way ahead of his time, like in terms of development. Like already in high school, he played, like, to my ears, he plays just like he plays right now. And in high school, he had a full beard. He was like, too serious. He just reached, you know, his maturity quick. And he said to me, I'll never forget, he said, all right, man, we're not listening to nobody no more. And we were like 15, so I said, why not? He said, because we got to find our own thing, right? Like, why would I want to find my own thing? Because I was getting a lot of juice, just sounding like whoever I was sounding like at the time. This little 14-year-old kid sounds just like Graham. You know what I mean?
Right.
But Omar knew it, man. His father was a musician, a jazz musician. He said, man, in a few years, they ain't gonna be cute no more, playing like somebody else. You know what I mean? I said, really? So I tried to stop. I did a good job. You know what I mean? I still play my Stanley records every once in a while. I play my Chaco records. But it was really about finding your own thing. And Lenny White, you know the drummer Lenny White? Yeah. Lenny White, for those of you who don't know Lenny White, he played drums with Chick Corea and Chick's most famous iteration of Return to Forever. It was Al Di Meola, Stanley Clarke, Chick, and Lenny played the drums. And when Lenny left the band, he returned home to Jamaica, Queens. That's where I'm from. That's where Omar's from. He started hanging out with the guys, with the young musicians. And he was like, yeah, you're going to be good when you find your own thing. And I was like, okay, I'm seeing this own thing. It's really important, you know? And I started to recognize, like, now I'm 18, I got my driver's license, I'm driving to the club, parking two blocks from the club, and I can hear the jam session. I said, oh, Tom Brown's here, you know? I'm like, wait, how do I know? He's got his own thing. Oh man, that's Denzel Miller on piano. Donald Blackman on his piano. Oh man, Bernard Rice here. Who drove him? He's only 13. You know? How did I get here? You know, but I'm not even in the club yet. And I realized, oh man, this is what it's all about. You know. So although, man, I was really into my heroes, for me, it was important to try to find something new. And then let me tell you what capped it off. I'm playing with Roberta Flack, right? And by the way, that's where I met Luther, in Roberta's band. He was singing background. Playing with Roberta, and we're in LA. I'm 18, and my phone rings. I told people the story before. My phone rings. Marcus Miller, it's Jaco Pastorius. I'm in 2:30. Get here and get your lesson, right? So like, I'm from around the way, so like, I'm like, man, this man. But I'm saying that as I'm walking to 2:30. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna get my lesson. And he was there with his wife, man, and he had his bass in the hotel room, you know. And he said, this is what I'm working on. And he played some little warm up. He uses all your fingers. And I said, oh man, that's cool. He said, okay, now you play something. And that moment, I was like, I'm from around the way. Ain't no way I'm gonna punk myself by playing somebody else's stuff in front of them, to them, like it's mine. You know what I mean? And I realized that's what jazz was all about. Like when you came up on the bandstand to sit in, if you sounded like somebody else, you got laughed off the bandstand because somebody else is right there behind you. So it was like walking into a club with somebody else's clothes on or somebody else's style, you know. So Chaco said, play something. I was like, out of my hand. He said, I can do that, I just don't. Did you just take a step back? Did I piss him off a little bit? You know, look, we were all young, right? I mean, Chaco, I considered him an older guy, but he was only, what, 24? I was 18, you know what I mean? Right. So there was a lot of, you know, how young musicians, especially young males, music is like a sports thing, right? So there's a little competition, you know what I mean? But it was all really with love, and it was always, we always knew that this competition thing that we're doing is only so that when we go to make music, we have sharp tools, right? We were never going to try to make music with competition. It was always just to make sure that your tools were sharp. Anyway, backed him up just one step. It was just one step, because he was still Chaco. And plus, I loved him, and I knew everything he played. Later on, he would come sit in with us in New York. Me, Lenny, Kenny Kirkland, bad piano. Oh, yeah. And Lenny, Kenny, and I had a trio, and sometimes Bernard Wright would replace Kenny. And Chaco would just come in, man, and sit in. You know what I mean? And what made it work was that even though I was very much influenced by him, and I had his stuff, and every once in a while we'd play one of his songs, like, you know, Continuum. Yeah. When he cut that on the record, he cut it with two basses. Just played the same thing twice. And it had that, that's why I had that broad chorusing sound on it, right? And I know because Lenny was on the record, and he told me, you know what I mean? So when we were live, we put it just like that. And I said, man, it sounds just like that. I just played with Jaco Pastor. chords. But I always had to, because he's like real aggressive, you know what I mean? Come on, Marcus, let me kick your ass, you know what I mean? But we're in New York, we're in my hometown now. I like, hey man, we ain't playing none of that little, down south funk. We're playing some real uptown, Jamaica funk. You know what I mean? And he was like, man, kiss my ass, man. But it was beautiful. It was really beautiful. But me having my own thing allowed me to like have a conversation, a real relationship with him. You know what I mean? And it's the same with the other bass players that I admire. You know what I mean? So a lot of people hear me warming up, and they'll say, "Oh man, why don't you play that stuff live?" I say, because it's not mine. You know what I mean? And I'll try to incorporate it into what I do. I'll try to incorporate what I've learned from all my heroes into my own style. But that was important. Now again, I'm telling you, this is just my experience, right? A lot of guys are like, man, I give anything just to be able to play like Jaco Pastorius. That's my goal. And once I achieve that goal, I'm going to be very happy. And that's cool, you know what I mean? But for me, it was always because of the environment I came up in. It was always important to find your own thing, The way I found my own thing was not thinking about it. The way I found my own thing is like I started this conversation by just trying to make the music sound better, whatever situation I was in. Right, so I'm in New York. All the studios are in New York. I'm starting to get called for studio work because I can read music. I started off on the clarinet, right? And the clarinet, you don't play it without reading music, at least classical clarinet. So I was a very good reader, and a lot of bass players, especially at that time, couldn't read music, you know what I mean? So it would take them long to figure out a song, or you would have to send them the song in advance. And at that time, New York was moving too fast for anybody to get something in advance. The arranger was just writing it out like half an hour before we cut it, you know what I mean? So I was getting a lot of studio work, and I learned really early on, if you just make the song sound good, use what you have to make the song sound good. And all of a sudden, my style started emerging, and I didn't even realize it, I'll tell you one more story. You all know Steve Gadd, right? Okay, Steve Gadd played on 2,000 records, right? And one of my early sessions with Steve Gadd, we walked in the studio, and Steve, we had a producer there who said, look, I have a demo of the song we're going to cut. And Steve said, okay, play it. And he put it on, and the demo was playing, and Steve said to the assistant engineer, hey, can I get a coffee? And blah, blah, blah. He ordered something to drink, and the coffee came. And he's sitting there listening and talking to me about something. Man, the Yankees, man, what's wrong with you? Like that. And the demo ended, and he said, play it again. And he kept talking. Played the demo about 12 times, right? Never pulled the sticks out the bag. We weren't even in the studio. We were in the control room, just listening and talking, and the song is just playing. I'm going. Every other drummer I knew, as soon as the producer put the demo on, the drummer starts playing along, like, I got this. Let me impress you with how quickly I can learn your song, right? Steve was not interested in impressing nobody. He was just letting the song absorb into his consciousness, right? And by the time 12, 15 plays, he had breakfast and ready to go cut it. He knew the chorus. He knew that the third chorus has a slightly different thing from the rest of the choruses. He knew emotionally what the song was about. He knew everything about this song, right? And me, I just happened to sit there answering his questions about the Yankees, right? But I benefited from the same thing, because I realized when we finally picked up our instruments, man, we know this song. We really know it, not just impressing somebody. You know those musicians when you're playing something for them and they're playing along with you. No, just stop for a minute, because it changes a second time, or it changes a third time. I got it, you got good ears. Okay, stop trying to impress me. Let's make this music good. Let's work on this music together. And man, we sat down there and cut that track. First take was good, it was great. The producer said, that was great, can we just cut one more just because I'm paying y'all so much? Right? And I learned a big lesson from that about the music. With my shovel. got work on our ending. Give it up for these fantastic musicians.
Yeah.
Any questions? Anybody got anything at all to ask?
I'd like to know on the session with Aretha and with Luther, the Jump to It session, is there anything you can share, and may they both rest in peace, about that session because that was an extraordinary groove. It's one that, you know, some 30 years later,
Yeah.
it's still being sampled, and it still defines that whole era of music, primarily from Aretha and Luther.
He's asking about a song called Jump to It, which came out in 1983, before some of y'all were born. And what happened with Jump to It, he's just asking in general about that whole thing, right? What happened was, Aretha had, she was the queen of the late 60s,
Right.
queen of the early 70s, and then we hadn't heard from her from about 75, 76. Luther loved Aretha Franklin. Matter of fact, you know, I was a musician snob when I was 17, 18. You know, I thought musicians were doing the real work, and the singers were just out there entertaining the audience. You know what I mean? And Luther heard me say something smart like that, and he said, "Sit down." He was singing with background with Roberta Flack, and he said, "Listen," and he played me Donny Hathaway, Aretha Franklin, Dionne Warwick. He played me all his favorite singers, and he broke it down like musicians break it down when you listen in the train or Bird. He said, listen, vibrato, no vibrato, straight tone, harmony changes, vibrato. He was breaking it down like that. Head voice, chest voice, mixed voice, right here. Listen to Smokey Robinson, his break is much higher between his chest and his head than most other singers. You can't tell the transition from his head. You know, he was deep into it, right? And I'm like, wow, man. So anyway, I would sit down regularly and learn about singing from him, because a lot of singers are talented, they might not know how to break down what it is they're doing. But Luther, because he was a studio singer, that's how we met. He was in the studios when we were cutting all those tracks. Luther and Fonzie Thornton and all these great background singers were coming in when we were leaving after we had cut the tracks to add the backgrounds. Okay, so he was doing as much work as everybody else. So anyway, he's this great background singer, but he's got a sound in his head. He said, "Man, I want to do my own stuff." I said, "Why do you want to do your own stuff? You're singing on every commercial on the radio, you know. You're singing for 3 beers at one time. People think you're just drunk." Miller beer, you know, like Budweiser. You know, Luther was getting paid as the background singer, you know. But he said, "No, man, I got a sound in my head, and I won't rest until I can get this sound out to people." So he had studio time on Sunday morning. I said, "Sunday morning, that's the only time I can afford to get the time." I said, "Okay." And we did Never Too Much and those things, right? And he finally got a record deal about a year later. It took him a long time, longer than one would expect, but he got a record deal. Never Too Much came out. It had Never Too Much, A House Is Not a Home. Okay, so he became an instant star. And Clive Davis called him up. I'm telling you all this because Clive Davis called him up and said, "Hey man, I read in an interview that you love Aretha Franklin. She signed to Arista Records. Would you be interested in producing?" So I was like, Luther called me up, "Hey man, we need to write a song for Aretha Franklin." I said, "Well, you know, I'm more into jazz." He said, "Shut up and write a song." Just write me a track, I'll hook it up. You know, so I wrote this track, man, and the bass line went. This is like early 80s, so everybody's doing that gigolo dance. So Luther said, "That bass line sounds a little backwards, but I kind of like it." Because it starts off to 1, 2, 3. Back then you had to put the pops back behind the beat. Check it out. 3. There you go. Make you go, "Ah, shit." Okay, so man, he called me. He's listening to my cassette. He called me. He said, "Man, you know that Porsche you always wanted?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Order it." I said, "What you talking about?" He said, "I just wrote the first verse to this track you sent me. This is gonna be a smash for Aretha Franklin." I said, "Man, whatever." You know. He calls back 20 minutes later. "I wrote the second verse. Make the Porsche blue." And the next call was, "It needs to have tan interior." You know what I mean? So he kept adding like what do you call it, options to my Porsche that he wants me to buy as he continued to work on this song. And then he said, "I wrote the hook." He said, you're gonna have to order a trailer, a hitched trailer, to carry all the money you ain't gonna be able to spend on the tour. No lie, this is how it went down. And then we cut the track with Luther's band. It was Yogi Horton on drums, Doc Powell on guitar, Nat Adley Jr., Cannibal Adley's nephew. He was on piano, and you know, Aretha wasn't there. Luther added Aretha later, so he calls me and says, "Come down to the studio. You got to hear this song." And for him, it was like heaven. Can you imagine, like, somebody that you looked up to your whole life, and all of a sudden you're in charge? And he had to do like I had to do with Miles. He had to tell her what to sing. You know what I mean? So he could imitate Aretha Franklin so well that she was like, she didn't have to do any work. She said, "Well, that sounds just like me. I don't even have to like change anything." You know what I mean? And anyway, he played me the song, and it was fantastic. You know? And it came out, man, and it was like people have been thirsty for that. You know what I mean? To bring Aretha back, but not as a lot of singers come back and they come back with the old style, and it's kind of like just homage to their former greatness. You know what I'm saying? But with Aretha, with this jump to it, it was like, no, this is today. You know what I mean? And people really appreciated that. It brought her back. You know, she went on. We did another song called "Get It Right." That was a big hit for her. And then she started working with Michael Narada Walden and Freeway of Love. So that started her whole resurgence, which we were really proud of. But it was I was talking about putting the bass behind the beat. You know, that every era has its, as a bass player, you got to learn, if you care, you got to learn the feeling of where the bass sits. You know what I mean? Like, just give me a straight, right? So, late 60s was like, and then the 70s, we were in this thing. It was like, well, there's two 70s. There's early 70s and late 70s. So early 70s was like 3. And you have to drop it so easy. Kids could start talking stuff. That Cat Shaft was a bad mother. That was the early 70s, and then, you know, late 70s we were like, you need a syncopation. Bernard Edwards. So keep going, and then we get to the early 80s. It was like this. Coming up in there, right? Yeah. So anyway, if you're paying attention, you can hear the bass lines change. All right, play 2, tap, 2. Don't slow that, don't. Slow. All right. So now everybody sounds like they're weeded out, right, on the bass. Yeah, Rick was. But if it was just D'Angelo, here you go. And you gotta make that face as a drummer because bass is so behind, you have to go. You ain't messing me up. You ain't messing me up. Yep. So anyway, Jump to It had that little hump in it. You know, a lot of stuff we did in the early 80s had that hump, and then things changed. So thank you for that question. Anybody else got a question?
Can you talk about working with Miles Davis?
Okay, who asked it? Miles Davis. Okay, yeah.
John Pierre.
Miles Davis, just like Aretha, he had been off the scene, but Miles had really been off the scene for 5 years, from like 1975, 1976 to 1981. We didn't even know if he was alive. And he was just holed up in his house after having made like 40 years, 40, 50, 60, 70, 40 years of incredible music. Just disappeared off the scene. 1981, Dr. George Butler, who was the head of jazz at Columbia Records, finally persuaded Miles to come out of retirement. And Miles decided to put together a young band. He called Dave Liebman, who had been playing sax in his band right before he retired. He said, "You got a young saxophone player for me to recommend." And he recommended a guy named Bill Evans, not Bill Evans, a piano player who played with Miles in the 50s, but Bill Evans, saxophone. This is 1981. And Bill helped Miles put together a band of young musicians. And he put together a band, and he said, "I need a funky bass player." And Bill said, "You should call this kid Marcus." So, I'm 21 years old at the time, and I've been doing some studio work, a good amount of studio work. And the receptionist to a studio handed me a note that said, "Call Miles." Probably Donald Blackman playing a joke on me. I'm not going to take a chance. And I called it back, and it was Miles, and he said, "Hey man, I'm going to the studio." And I said, "Hey man, you be in the studio 2 hours, Columbia Records." I said, "Is this really you?" "Yeah, man." I said, "It must be you." So I showed up at the studio. Al Foster on drums, Sammy Figueroa on percussion, Bill Evans was playing the saxophone with Miles. Guitarist named Barry Finnerty was at that first session, and Miles himself, and he just showed me 2 notes, man. It was like, the info he gave me was real cryptic, you know what I mean? Like paint on, paint off. You know, he said, "This is how it goes." Got it? No lie, that's exactly what he said. He played on the piano, played F sharp and G. I told the story a lot, you know. And I started off, man, band started kicking off like. He stopped the band, man, after like 20 seconds. "That's why you gonna play, man?" No, I got it. Stop. What the hell are you doing? Play F sharp G, then shut up, mama. Luckily for me, in Jamaica, Queens, there's a whole bunch of Miles Davis wannabes, a whole bunch of band leaders who were giving you those kind of directions and messing with you. And I said, "I know what to do. I'm gonna close my eyes and ignore your ass, okay? And just play what I feel, you know, figure out how to make some music with these 2 notes, you know." And we did the take, and he let it go all the way. He said to the band, he said, "Y'all play like a bunch of sissies." But he didn't say sissies. I said, "This ain't going well at all." But as he was walking out of the studio, you know, because he was like disgusted with us, and he's walking out of the studio. I'm the last guy before the door, and he goes to me, give me a little wink, and let me know it's all good. You know? And he asked me to be in his band later that session. And you know, I was in his band for 2 years. Mike Stern eventually replaced Barry Finnerty, so it was Mike Stern. Mino Sinalu was percussionist in the touring band. Al Foster, Bill Evans, and Miles, and myself. And it was incredible, man. It was incredible. He wasn't in the greatest health. Just to be on the stage with him, man. Just to realize that Charlie Parker, John Coltrane, Bud Powell, Dizzy Gillespie, just to realize that they all started off as human beings was a trip, you know what I mean? And then you started expounding on that and going, wait, Martin Luther King was a human being too, wasn't he? All these great people that I read about that feel more like gods than human beings, you realize, no man, these are people. Go to the bathroom. You know what I mean? And that's really important. I'm being funny, but it's really important to recognize that for musicians and just people in life, that these people are not special from you. You know what I mean? I mean, they're talented. But young musicians, you don't have to spend your whole life revering the guys from 3 generations before you. Because you need to give 2 generations from now, you need to give them something to revere. You need to give them something to look forward to. And you also need to be able to describe as a musician what's going on in the world today. If you play bebop, when I hear bebop, I hear the 1940s. I can see it. I can see the way they dressed. I can see the way they walk, the way they talk. What's up, hip cat? You know what I mean? I can hear that. I hear 50s music. I can hear that style. 60s, I can definitely hear that. 70s, you know, you heard Parliament Funkadelic. You can taste the 70s, right? You know, you can smell the 70s. Right? And so, to see Miles up there on the stage, man, see him hit wrong notes every once in a while, just made it so much better for me. I said, okay, you reach down and you find whatever you got. You know what I mean? You make music with it. You might not end up being Miles, but, you know, you're going to be who you're going to be. You know? And so it was incredible. I also, you know, in jazz, I don't know how many of you guys consider yourself jazz musicians, but in jazz, it's gotten to the point with improvisation that musicians go, I have to play stuff in my improvisation that I've never played before, right? Every note has to be the lost note, note that I didn't even know I had inside me, you know what I mean? Who came up with that? Louis Armstrong, he had his licks, you know what I mean? He had his thing, and when he was inspired, he'd add some stuff to his thing, but he had his thing that he could, you know, he had a set of phrases that were comfortable, that let you know it was Louis Armstrong, and so did Clifford Brown, and so did Miles Davis, and so did John Coltrane. You know, if they got inspired, yeah, every once in a while Miles is inspired, and he'd go off into outer space, and Al Foster Man would be like, yeah, Chief, yeah, tears coming out of his eyes. Beautiful, Chief. And you know, those were special moments. Didn't happen every night. You know what I mean? Sometimes, you know, depending on what he ate or what happened during the day, he wasn't, you know, the same as he was the night before. Okay, it's human beings, regular life. It's really important for a young musician to see. You know what I mean? And it's really important to see a musician like Miles unafraid. Like in the 50s, Miles Davis was the most famous musician in jazz. Now imagine it's 1959 and you're the most famous musician in jazz. When you play a concert at a club, Frank Sinatra's over there, and Ava Gardner's over there, you know what I mean? And Martin Luther King's over there, all right? Imagine that. 1959, you go, it's time for me to change things up. How many of y'all would have the courage, after reaching that height of popularity, to say, hey man, I need to change it up? He did it, and what happened? In the 50s, he had John Coltrane in his band, he had Cannonball Adderley for a while, he had my cousin Wynton Kelly, Bill Evans, he had Philly Joe Jones on the drums, and Paul Chambers. He had legends, right? That ended. He started his next band after a couple of years. Who ended up in his band? Herbie Hancock, Wayne Shorter, Ron Carter, Tony Williams. He did it again, right? There was no guarantee. He didn't have any crystal ball that said, hey man, your next quintet is going to be as influential as your previous one. He didn't know. He was just like, I can't keep doing the same thing. All right. So now Wayne and Herbie and those guys, they're at the top of the jazz game. 1967, he goes, I got changed. He's been hearing Sly, he's been hearing James Brown, he's been hearing his wife Betty. Y'all know about his wife Betty Davis? Imagine that poster of Angela Davis that you had in your bedroom when you were a kid, with the big afro. You know what I mean? That's what Betty, man. And she was like wearing the knee-high boots, and he was like, I got the suit with a tie, it's not working. You know what I mean? It's a time to change it. Changed again. And created fusion, you know, or it helped create fusion. You know what I mean? And now it's the 80s, and 1985, he tells Tommy LaPuma at Warner Brothers, I want to do something new. And Tommy calls me up and said, Marcus, we just signed Miles Davis. I know you played bass with him for 2 years. You got any music? I said, what's he want to do? He says he wants to do something new. He said, I'm going to send you the cut that George Duke just recorded on. This cut had drum machines and samplers. And I'm like, Miles knows this is jazz. He's a jazz musician, right? Tommy said, you want to do something different? I said, okay. I started writing and came up with Tutu. Came up with a bunch of songs for him. And walked in the studio, like Tommy said, bring your songs to the studio. I brought him to the studio. And it was like I was nervous. You know, I was like, he's not gonna like this stuff. It's too modern, because it's 1985. Tutu was real modern. Right? He was like, Tommy said, "This is great. Let's cut it." I said, "Where's Miles?" He's not here. I said, "Where's the band?" "They're not here." "Well, how are we gonna cut it?" "I want you to cut it the same way you cut the demo." I said, I did a demo like I do R&B demos. I played all the instruments myself, but I assumed that we're going to replace them with his band. "No, man, let's do it. I want it to sound exactly like that." So I got all my instruments to the studio, my samplers, keyboards, basses, and guitars. We cut the track. Now I'm going like, this is like heresy. So Miles comes in. I said, "Okay, well, Miles is going to come in. He's going to put a squash on the whole thing." So Miles comes in 3 days later, listens to it. And I had a little trumpet sample. And I was playing exactly like Miles. You know what I mean? So Miles listens and goes, "Who's that on trumpet? Matt Adderley?" I said, "No, it's just a sample." "Okay, let me know when you need trumpet." And he left. "It sounds good, by the way." And then he left. I said, "Okay, if y'all gonna let me do this, I'm gonna do it." Okay? We did Tutu, we did the whole album. They've been working with different producers, but they liked this direction. So man, we did Tutu, and it came out, and like the jazz purists were like, "This is horrible," right? And everybody else was like, "This is the best thing I ever heard." I've been waiting for this, you know what I mean? And Miles, he just was not afraid. It wasn't even about fear. He was just like, I asked him about it. He said, "Man, it's like, I can't go put on some clothes that I used to wear 25 years ago. You know, what would you do if somebody said, 'Hey man, you got to grow your Jerry curl back'?" You'd be like, "Dude, first of all, I can't. Second of all, I won't, even if I could." And that's how he was about music. You know what I mean? He was like, "Hey man, I just did an Instagram about this." He was a mirror of the times he lived in. And a lot of artists feel that's a responsibility, to reflect their times. So you see, if you ask me one question, I'm gonna go on for like.
Marcus, we got time for one more.
Okay, I got time for one more. Okay, I'm gonna do two. I'm gonna do you. I'm gonna make the answers quicker. Okay, yes, and I'll get you in the back.
Can you say something about your signature sound, like developing your sound in some of the aspects of it, like how you do it? And you switch heads so often. Can you say something about switching, because you're a bassist, a keyboardist, a horn player, this and that, so something about the compositional end of it, how you do that?
So he's saying that, first of all, my sound, I Fender 1977 jazz bass was the bass I started off with. Actually, I started with a 74, got that stolen out the car. 75, left that in the car, so I don't even call that getting stolen. I gave that one away. So my mom dug into the bank and got my third one. That's a 1977 jazz bass, and that's the one that I played all my life, right? In every situation. 77, so around right when I joined Miles, 81, Roger Sadowski encouraged me to put a preamp in the bass, because I was a session musician in New York, and the sessions go by so fast, you know what I mean? Like, they'll mess around with the guitar player's amp, getting the right sound for the guitar player, but they didn't feel like wasting all that time on the bass. They just plugged you in direct. So if the sound coming off your bass wasn't good, then you had problems. They weren't going to hire you. So put this preamp, that way I had more control over my bass. I could basically say to the engineer, "This is the sound that I think is good," without you having to fix it, you know. And that worked for me, you know, and I got comfortable with it. It didn't even occur to me to change basses or change sounds for all this time. You know what I mean? I would change styles, and I would try to figure out different ways to work with what I was doing. But the bass, you know, especially with the thumb style, it's basically regular jazz bass, but with more treble and more bass. You know what I mean? Exaggerated treble, exaggerated bass. The treble is exaggerated because it was the 80s when I first started playing, and they would ask you, the producers would ask you to double the synth. Can you double the synth bass? You know, so I spent a lot of time going. So the little pops, the only way I could get them to come out against all those synthesizers of the 80s was to have a lot of treble on the bass. But I think that the secret was I never lost the bottom. You know what I mean? A lot of bass players now, the bass sounds more like just all high end. But my response, I still had to hold the band together, you know what I mean? So it was lows and highs. And consequently, since you exaggerate the lows, exaggerating the highs, what happens in mid-range? It sounds like it's being scooped, right? So that's my sound. In terms of switching heads on instruments, I started on clarinet when I was 10. They offered trumpet, drums, and clarinet in 5th grade. And I wanted to play drums, but we lived in a small apartment. My father said no way. So I ended up playing clarinet. And, you know, from the clarinet, you can go to saxophone. You know what I mean? It's very similar. My dad's a piano player, so I was always taking lessons from him. So from the keyboards, you can go everywhere. And like I was saying, compositionally, the keyboards are very important. And everybody wants to play the drums, so I would just show up at rehearsal early for every rehearsal from when I was 16 to 21 and just bang on the drums until everybody showed up. And everybody was always an hour late, so I always got 2 hours of practicing. So it's just families, you know what I mean? Like keyboard, there's a whole family, you know, this sounds better on the organ, this sounds better on the synth, this sounds better on the bass synth, this sounds better on the clavinet, but it's all the same technique, you know. On the horn, the only thing about the horns is that you gotta make sure you get your keys straight, you know, because if you're playing a horn that's in the key of B flat, you gotta play a whole step higher. So sometimes early on when I would switch from the horn back to the bass, I'd end up playing the wrong key, forgetting that I was now playing an instrument in concert C. But after a while, man, it's like speaking different languages. Vous changez très rapidement quand on parle français. C'est pas difficile de faire l'échange. At first, you'd be saying things, you'd be speaking Franglish. You know what I mean? But after a while, you get together. Is there a question out there? Yes, sir.
What of all the studios you recorded in, what was your favorite one, your favorite sound?
The studios, they become your favorite because why? You had a hit. Well, not just a hit. You had something that you're proud of. You know what I'm saying? So for me, there's a studio called Power Station that we cut a lot of David Sanborn tracks in that I have fond memories. Media Sound is where we cut all of Luther Vandross's stuff. Capitol Studios in Los Angeles, that's that round building that you see every orientation shot in the movie where you want to know that you're in LA, that round white building, that's Capitol Studios. In the basement of that is a beautiful studio, Nat King, they got pictures of Nat King Cole singing there, Judy Garland, Frank Sinatra's been there forever. It's classic. We cut Miles' Tutu there, so that studio is very special too. All right, let's play one more thing. What are you gonna play? Hey, thank you very much. Give it up for these guys, please. All right, thank you, guys.
Don't anybody leave the room. We're doing a raffle real quick. We're giving away Marcus Miller's bass. You want this one right here?